Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us here at the Beyond the Veil Summit. And today we have a really special guest who's an esteemed colleague of mine, Sue Brain. And I want to say a few words by way of introduction. Sue is really a leading pioneer in extraordinary end-of-life experiences, or also known as end-of-life phenomena. She's also an author and a speaker, and she hosts a podcast, Embracing Your Mortality. Sue, welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to see you, William.
Yeah, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. So I want to begin by really acknowledging how diverse your background is. Like when I was reading up on you, and I've heard about this as well from others, you began as a nurse, and then you also practiced as a psychotherapist. And then somewhere along the way, you became a leading researcher. So could you tell us a bit about how your path to get to?
Well, it all started when I was 36. At the time, I was really not living a very productive life. I'll putting it mildly. But I was involved in a plane crash, and it was a two-seater Cessna. And the fact I'm sitting here is a miracle. But it was the fact obviously I survived. But it completely changed my life, because I suddenly saw, sitting beside the wreckage of the plane, that the life I was living was a sham. And if I didn't do something to change my life, it would have been better to have died in the crash. And that was such a powerful message. And then it was really interesting, because, as soon as I sort of thought, oh my God, what do I do? How do I get out of the sort of really negative lifestyle I was living at the time? People started showing up in my life to help me, really. And one of them gave me a magazine article about the work of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And her words, if you can't live, you can't die. And if you can't die, you can't live. Well, they just spoke to my soul. So I went and did one of her life, death and transition workshops. And from there, everything just changed and took off, and it catapulted me onto a massive healing journey, just to understand what living and dying was all about. And since then, so that was 33 years ago, I've dedicated my life to exploring my mortality and how to make the best use of my mortality. I need to say here that the word mortality is usually associated with death, but I look at it as actually about the way we live until our death. And then I met Dr. Peter Fenwick, through very serendipitous experiences and this huge journey I was on. And he invited me to become his honorary researcher into a near-death experience he was leading, which was one of the first of its kind to really look at the existential experiences of people as they die. And that's when I realized that love plays such a role in the dying process, even when it's really traumatic. So since then, that's what I do. I go around talking about death and dying, but come on, we need to make the best of our mortality, because whether you believe in past lives or not, that's not relevant, really. The matter is what we make of the life that we have now.
Wow, beautiful. And I know you had a very formative mystical experience. Was that associated with the plane crash, or?
It came after it. It was a couple of years after it, but by that time I was well on my healing journey, and I was just no stone unturned. I just wanted to find out who I was, because I really didn't know before the plane crash. I had a lot of bravado going on, but underneath it, no idea who I was. So it happened in the most prosaic of circumstances. And I've talked to a lot of people about mystical experiences, obviously, since I've had mine. And people will say the same thing. You're walking down the street or oh, I don't know, you're sitting in a park or something, and suddenly wham. Well, for me, I was sitting on a train looking out the window, and there was a woman opposite me reading the newspaper, and I stared out of the window, and this is how it happened. It felt suddenly like the curtains in my forehead parted, and I was floating up in, it's really difficult to put this into words because I don't actually have the language, but it felt like I was floating up in kind of a color that I didn't recognize, but it was dark and it had kind of sparkles. But what really impacted me the most, I was very conscious of this, was the love. And I suddenly felt as if I was bathing in a love I have never experienced on earth. And this love was completely, the word comes to me as non-judgmental, but again, it doesn't quite do it justice. It was utterly accepting. And then I felt this presence just, oh God, it just takes me right back, just beside me. Now, I couldn't see the presence, but it was a telepathic experience and connection. And it was like, oh my God, what am I doing here? And as I was floating up, I knew I was age 76, and I could only imagine that I was dying. That's all I couldn't imagine, but it didn't bother me because I was so, oh God, enveloped by this love that I just, that was it. I didn't care about anything else. And then I looked down to my hip, my left hip, and I just saw this yellow color streaming out of my hip. It was like a lime yellow color. And I knew that she didn't tell me the presence, I call her she, I think it was a she. She didn't say anything, but I just knew that was the story of my life. And it was like a stream of story. And I could jump into that story and start looking at my life. And then the presence communicated to me, look, life is only an experience. That's all it is. And it was just like, doing, oh my God, of course it is. And at that moment, I wanted to sort of, please, can I, tell me more? And it was almost like the teaching had been given to me, and then curtains in my forehead, bang, shut. And I was back on the train, completely bereft of this love. And I remained bereft and deeply depressed for being back here, because I couldn't get back to it. It was like, the Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, trying to find the way through the fur coats to get to the back of the wardrobe. Where's Narnia? And I've never experienced it again, but I know it's waiting for me. I know it. Yeah.
I mean, spontaneous mystical experience.
And people say that's not possible. And you can't have mystical experiences if you're just wandering around and but you can, because I did. That's what happened for me. And that's another thing that really catapulted me onto this journey of looking at consciousness and the whole dying experience, and what does that mean to us, and what does it teach us? What does it teach us who remain beside the bedside or as the carers or whatever? And what does it mean for us as we die? And I know that when I die, and I assume I'm going to die at 76, I mean, I assume I am, that I will be met by a presence. I can only assume that. I can only assume that I'm going to have a life review of some form. Well, I will wait and see.
Yeah, what's the alternative?
I mean, since then I've read so many books, and Eben Alexander, obviously, The Proof of Heaven. I mean, I just loved it. And then Jill Bolt Taylor talking about, the incredible experience that she had when she had her her stroke, and how she was talking about consciousness and this beautiful love and sort of feeling of just being massively expansive. Well, it was virtually what I was experiencing, because I lost my body, but I still had consciousness. I still knew I was me. And I'm still curious about that. But then I think even Alexander knows that he was still him when he had his near. And I've read thousands of books. Every book I could get my hands on after that, I read about near-death experiences and people come back changed because they realize we need to help each other to break through this curtains that, these heavy curtains that we live amongst. But there's something else, there's something much more amazing. And I know this life, for me, I can only speak personally, is only an experience, but it's what I make of that experience that matters.
I mean, so yes, let's go right there. So you have this experience at the plane crash that you survive, and it's a wake-up call. You acknowledge that you changed your life significantly, radically, and then you have this spontaneous mystical experience on the train, and you see this teaching that life is just an experience. And so where does that take you next?
Well, I mean, it culminated the whole journey. I mean, we're talking, a long time on the healing journey and really researching everything I could. And then I know this sounds nuts, but this is what happened. I was working in a spiritual center in England. I was actually working in the kitchens at the time because I kind of couldn't fit back into life. Mainstream life just didn't work for me. And I had this absolute knowing I needed to go to university and do a degree, and I needed to go and learn about death and dying as an academic. That's what was. I hadn't even been to university. I was 46 by then, so I just thought, oh, all right then. I'd written several books on women in spirituality, so I was used to the writing process, but not academic study. And I thought, well, I'll have a look and see what's knocking about. And synchronistically, 10 miles down the road in Southampton. It was through Southampton University. King Alfred Winchester was running an MA program in the rhetoric and rituals of death. And I thought, well, they'll never have me on the MA program because I haven't got a first degree. I'll have to go and do a 3-year degree. Went and met the tutors and they went, oh, no, that's absolutely fine. You're a mature student. You've done all this stuff. You've, told them a bit about my story. Just come on board and come and do the MA. So I stepped from never having written an academic, I didn't even know how to write an academic essay, into doing my MA in the rhetoric and rituals of death. And then through that, I met Peter Fenwick and then became his honorary researcher into this end-of-life experience study that he was leading. And then we rolled out, a lot of 6 or 7 academic papers on the study that we were doing in different ways, yeah. But very, very little into the existential experiences of the dying process. And we ended up splitting them into 2 distinct sections, if you like. One is sort of, we called it more of the here and now. It's like the dying, even before they necessarily know they're dying, suddenly want to start visiting people to make amends with them, or putting their affairs in order, or making sure everything's all right, they're paying the mortgage off, that kind of really practical thing. And often they sort of start doing it spontaneously, or they may know they're dying and they want to go and visit their childhood home. They want to go through photographs. There is a sort of pressing need to form some form of completion or gestalt before they enter into the final time of their dying process. This doesn't happen for everybody, but it does happen to a significant amount of people. And I found that absolutely fascinating. So that's we called it the here and now. But the second section, which I found just riveting, was we called it the transpersonal, the sort of the more transcendent, if you like, the more transcendent experiences. So it would be things like somebody was deeply unconscious and against all medical odds would wait for a beloved person to come and visit them before they died. They might wait till everybody's left the room because they want the peace and quiet to die. They may, the big thing also was the apparitions we call them takeaways, the deathbed apparitions. So let's say Great Auntie Martha arrives at the end of the bed and the dying person says, "Oh, Great Auntie Martha's here." And, the relatives will say, "Well, Auntie Martha died 10 years ago. How can she be here?" So there's a huge amount of evidence now, since Peter and I did this research study, that's now being collected. And my own sister-in-law, her mum, when she was dying, she was such a lovely woman, kept telling Ros that her sister, who died 20 years ago, was waiting for her in the next room, just waiting for her, making petticoats as she was waiting for her. And this was giving Ros's mum real comfort. And I think that a lot of people I spoke to, a lot of relatives, when they were saying, "Oh, mum's just come to visit dad," rather than saying, "Oh my God, they've gone crazy, or they need drugs, or they're having hallucination, sort of drug-induced hallucinations," they're actually beginning to actually listen and say, "That's marvelous. Tell me more. What she looked like. How is she?" That kind of thing. A lot of the dying often talk about children suddenly playing outside the room when they're, 4 floors up in the hospital. It's that kind of thing. And a lot of people start talking about their language starts changing, and they'll start saying things like, "Oh, it's time to go home," or "Where's my suitcase?" or "I want to pack my suitcase." It's those sort of little things that we used to ignore, or we used to give them drugs to kind of stop them, really. And I think it's what we discovered, the difference between a drug-induced hallucination and what we called an end-of-life experience, was the quality of it. Because when people are drug-induced, or they're quite distressed, or they pluck at the air, they kind of pluck, or they're very agitated. And people who had end-of-life experiences, who really were having incredibly powerful subjective experiences of the experience of somebody else being there, even if other people couldn't see it, they were greatly calmed. And they kind of felt like somebody was going to come and take them away and collect them. And a lot of the relatives who kind of went, "This is very cool," just said, "I'm so glad mum and dad didn't die. They weren't alone." So it helps with the grieving process. It sort of releases that sense of pain and shame and guilt that often comes with when you think you haven't done a good job sitting beside the dying.
Yeah.
And a lot of that happens.
Beautiful. And I so appreciate that you're sharing this, because this research, as you said, it was out there a bit beforehand, but then you and Peter and your team really up the level of research and validation. And then, of course, since then, there's been Christopher Kerr, Buffalo Hospice in New York, has done a tremendous amount of work on this too. And of course,
Monica Rentz as well, fantastic. She's an oncologist in Switzerland, and she's done a huge amount of research into this now. So I don't think it's necessarily mainstream yet, but it's definitely, people think it isn't crazy talk anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's the huge shift, is that hospices in particular are doing more education with their the families, not just the dying, but the families say, yeah, this happens. And these are comforting. I think, they even teach kind of clinical methods, if you will, for how to engage, just as you modeled a few seconds ago, like, tell me more. It sounds like they're talking to so-and-so. Yeah, it's beautiful. And this is a huge shift, as you noted, from treating this as a hallucination.
I think I'd like to sort of add something else here, especially for people who are really troubled when they're sitting beside somebody who's not having a great death. And there are plenty of stories of that. And it often leaves, the relative or whoever's sitting beside the deathbed quite traumatized. But I actually look at it in a different way, because I was interviewing a woman for Living Fully, Dying Consciously, which is the book that came out in 2020. And she was telling me about the terrible experience she had with her father, and he couldn't bear to let go. And she was totally helpless, hopeless, sitting beside him every day, witnessing this horrible ending of a life. And she just said, I wish I hadn't been there, and I wish I hadn't seen it, because it just sits in my head all the time. And for me, I said to her, I just wondered if you understand the act of love that you gave to him just by being there, by being willing to sit in your helplessness and horror and hopelessness, but you didn't leave him. You just were there for him and witnessed this awful end of life. But love, that's the biggest love you could ever give anyone. So love comes in at the end of life in all sorts of weird ways that we don't know until it's there. And I think that, I don't know if that helped her or not, but she did go, oh, I hadn't thought of it like that. But it's true. It's amazing love to sit with somebody who's really struggling to let go. Amazing, amazing love.
Yeah. I the sense of helplessness that we have when our loved ones are suffering, especially, at the end of life, when this is the last chapter and you so want them to have, as you said, the good death.
Yeah.
And that doesn't always happen that way.
No, it doesn't. And I do a lot. I facilitated a lot of death cafes, and this concept of the good death comes up quite a bit. And somebody, and I'm really careful about what that means now, because of this particular participant who came, and we were talking about the whole concept of a good death, and she suddenly went, oh blimey, does that mean I've got to actually succeed at my death as well? Because I just feel so pressurized now. I've got to have a good death. And since she said that, I call it conscious death rather than good death, because there seems to be a lot of emphasis. We must all have good deaths, and it's not going to happen. But what we could do is become more conscious around death. And I think could be more helpful, actually, in a different way of looking at it. So she was a great teacher for me.
Can you say what you mean by a conscious death? What does that really mean? What does that entail?
Well, I can only speak for myself again. For me, I think what a conscious death means is being alive till I die, being actively engaged in my process of living and dying. That's what I want. That's what I'm working towards even now. And I think the more that I clear my stuff and become clearer as who I am, the more likely I will be able to accept my death. I'm not frightened of the natural cycles of life and death at all, because I'm just accepting that my mortality is going to come to an end. And when it does, it does. So there's a wonderful Native American Indian saying, is like, every day is a great day to die. And that's what I am working with. Today is a great day to die. It might not happen for another, God knows how long, could happen tomorrow, but I'm ready. I have my wills ready. I have my lasting power of attorney ready. That's the practical thing. And I'm ready inside me. And that matters to me a lot. And I'm 70 in February. And I look at this next stage of my life, although I'm healthy and fit. But I look at it as I'm really entering my final, I'm going down the slippery slope. And I want to really enjoy going down that slope. I don't want to be frightened of it. Of course I'm going to be scared at some points, of course, because letting go is scary. It's like, it's going down the helter-skelter, isn't it? You've got to let go of the sides of the thing to, zip down. And I think that's what I feel. I want to be alive. I want to be conscious. I want to be, I want to experience the transition consciously from leaving my body to going into what comes next.
Wow.
That's on my bucket list.
That will be the last item on your bucket list,
That's
Sue,
the
no
last
matter
item
what.
on my bucket list.
Well,
Yeah.
let's talk about the sense then, from your research, your experiences, where do you think we go?
Ooh, big question, isn't it? Well, I got incredibly excited by a Canadian research project that happened. I think it was 2018. It was something 2017 to 18. But they and Canada's way ahead of certainly us in the UK, because they do practice assisted dying in certain situations. And, I wave the flag for that myself. Obviously it's illegal in this country, in the UK, so it's not a possibility at the moment. But they did an amazing research project with 4 dying people, and they had electrodes on their heads and goodness knows what. And one of them, who was declared clinically dead by various doctors, no pulse, no eye movements, no heart rate, gonzo. They noticed that there was brain waves continuing for 10 minutes after they were declared clinically dead. And this was a delta wave, brain wave, which is when we're sleeping. It's the deepest part of when we sleep. And it's the part of us that kind of cleans up so that we can start anew the next day. It's a clearing process, the delta wave sleep level. And this happened to this one person. The others 3 didn't, but this one person did. Gosh, that made me curious. And then there's been amazing research done onto poor old rats. They've been given heart attacks and things like that, and they put electrodes on their heads as they're dying. And there is evidence that consciousness or whatever, brain waves continue after clinical death. And I think that is really, really exciting.
Well, going back to your research, where these pre-death visions or visitations you talked about, who do you think these visitors are? Are these? Yeah. How do you make sense of that? Because that connects very deeply with the sense of an afterlife and our loved ones surviving and then coming back and greeting us at the veil, if you will. How do you make sense of that?
Well, I think it's subjective. It's a really subjective experience. And I don't feel it's for us to say it isn't true. If it's true for the dying person and it's bringing them what they need, it's true to them. And I think to negate that, to pretend it isn't happening, or to try and shut them up, or to medicalize them, I think that's not great. Because if they're having that experience, then yes, please. I'd love my friend Lucinda to come and collect me. I mean, if we could talk about this more, if we could just make this acceptable, if we could watch out for it more, I think more people would report them. But I think a lot of people don't, because they think they're going to be regarded as insane, or there's something weird with the person who was dying and they had this and it can't have been true. But I do think a lot of doctors are now coming round. There's some smashing GPs I know personally in the UK who are really doing some wonderful work around end of life. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but certainly the research coming out of Johns Hopkins University and also King's College with the use of psilocybin to help the dying to stop feeling afraid of death. I think that's another area that is going to be very, very life-changing for some people, because it puts us in touch with a different understanding of consciousness, if you like. So there is definitely a huge movement towards that. And I think it's happening in America as well.
No,
So
absolutely.
So I think that's something that will be opening up. I mean, you don't have to take psychedelics to deal with the dying process. You could do it through holotropic breath work or meditation, but it's about finding ways to center yourself, to connect with your heart, your head, your soul, as an agreement that, you're getting ready to go and it's okay. And you're all, you're doing it together as a unit. And I just believe my soul, personally, I believe my soul's going to go on, and my spirit is everlasting, because it's the unity of all, and that transcendent part of us, where the soul is, I need to have the experience of this human experience, coming through the personality, if the personality allows it, of course. But I just feel that the Sue Brain is definitely going to die. Will need the rest when my time comes. But I think consciousness, I love what the Buddhists say, that this sense of consciousness enters the flow of a flow of a river of consciousness, and that eventually incarnates again in another personality. And that keeps going until that river of consciousness clears itself enough to what they call it enlightenment, whatever that means. But, so that you can actually release, you don't need to come back constantly to do this extremely hard work on this earth plane, because it's not a bag of, it's not great fun here. It's hard work. Well, I found it hard work anyway.
Well, you said earlier, that your insights from your mystical experiences, or experience primarily, was that life is an experience. And so if that's the case, then if I understand you, then you see consciousness continuing beyond human death, and then eventually, in a certain sense, re-experiencing itself anew in other incarnations. Is that right, Sue? Am I getting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you something very strange, shall I?
Please.
Yes, okay. I like the work of William Meader, who holds the esoteric teachings of Alice Bailey. I find him a really inspiring person. And for me, how he teaches, most of it makes sense. I kind of go, that makes sense for me. Anyway, I was doing a workshop with him on reincarnation. And I haven't really put a lot of time and attention into reincarnation, to be honest with you. I've sort of been more living in the present and what mortality means to me and things like that. Anyway, at the end of this fascinating 2-hour lecture, he said at the end, I'm going to put you into a meditation and then just see what happens for you. Just be open, but it'll be linked to do with your next incarnation. So I thought, all right then. And closed my eyes. And he said, what will you be taking into your next incarnation? And immediately the word came forgiveness. And I thought, oh, okay, that's cool with me. I really liked the idea of taking forgiveness in. And then just in that nanosecond, this young man appeared in front of me in my mind's eye. And he was definitely Indian, I'd say, or definitely from that part of the world, Asia, definitely. And he told me his name was Kaleem. So I assume he was Muslim. I don't know, but I guess he was. And he said, I'm your next incarnation. And I am going to be using forgiveness to help people to understand how to forgive themselves for what they've done to the earth. Woo!
Ooh, yeah.
Oh, okie doke. And then boom, he was gone. And it was just like, what was that about? So I just feel, and he kind of left me with this feeling of, you've got to do the work now, Sue, to pass the baton on to him. If this is true, by the way, if it is true, but I feel like I'm going to be passing a baton on to this chap. And I want him to be able to hit the road running when he incarnates. So I want to get as clear as I can. And this might sound batty to people, but it just gives my aging process and my dying process meaning and purpose. And if it's true to me, it's true to me.
Well, what you just said really sheds light on a question that I often ask people as a psychotherapist working around end of life and other venues. Like, what does your understanding of consciousness and what comes next for us, how does that inform the way we live now? And you just laid it out beautifully. It sounds like you're working now to lighten your karmic load, if you will.
Absolutely.
So you can really be ready for a good death, a graceful death, and then into another incarnation.
And even if it isn't a graceful death, because I don't know how I'm going to die, it was very nice in the process of the mystical experience. I'll have that again. Thanks very much. It was woo. It was absolutely beautiful experience. But it could mean that I could die suddenly, and that could happen. It could mean that I have a protracted death. I've no idea. But I do feel that my job now, and I don't feel morbid about any of this. I just feel really excited that it is my job to prepare myself well. So this next incarnation, if it is him or not, just can get on with it. They don't have to do what I've had to do this lifetime. So I take my healing and my engagement with my mortality extremely seriously, and that's my job.
That is quite a message. I can't say that I've heard that expressed, except in, as you mentioned earlier, Buddhist settings where the goal is to get off the wheel of life, and the constant rebirths and what have you. I want to ask you a question here. You use a term that I've seen this in your writings and other talks you've given. Consciousness quickens.
Yes.
During the dying process. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Yeah, it feels like, and again, I don't want to negate this bad death, good death stuff, because I know some people have really difficult times dying. And there's a lot talked about good deaths, but not that much about bad death. But I want to just recognize that some people really have a difficult time, and it may not happen if this happens, and it may. But people who appear to have made peace with themselves, there is this there's a sort of quickening. It's like there's a tipping point in the dying process. You're ill, you go through a time where you're really ill. And then there comes a point when you start the tipping point. You go over the top of the hill and you can't get back up that hill. There's only one way, and it's down the hill. And there's this sense of, it sort of quickens, the veil becomes thin. And a lot of there's a lot of reports of this. Again, sort of when you really drill down and ask people about it, they go, oh, that's exactly what happened. But it feels like the veil thins. And some people they take a while to die because it feels like they've got one foot in their body and their soul and their spirit is still in, or maybe it's hovering, but it's still attached to this earthly existence. And maybe it's learning about the dying process in the context of this person's personality. And then there is this other foot that is in another world. And people will come back and just say, do you know, I've seen this other amazing world, and it's nothing like here, and it's full of love. And it's that kind of, they're living in two places. And my father he was built like a bull, hugely big man, bull of a man, and a stroke took him out, and he was found by the postman. So they got him into hospital, and I said, look, he doesn't want to be resuscitated or anything like that, no life extending treatment. And I just sat beside him as he took a week to die. They were expecting him to die the next day, and it was a week. And he'd been a schoolmaster in a school, and he was a scholar. And during lifetime, I always used to remember him sort of sitting like this, studying things or reading a book. But he would sit like this. That was his kind of, that was his way, his way of doing it. And he was unconscious, and blow me down, raised the hand he could move, and suddenly started looking like this, with kind of half open eyes, which were kind of glazed over, but with such intent. And I swear to God, he has been taught how to die. I swear he was. And it was almost like he took that long, a whole week, to let go. And then I managed to come back in the morning just as he was literally, I walked into the room, and the nurses said, oh my God, he's going. And it was just like, so I just, open the window, fly, Dad, fly. And I felt like he needed that time to understand what was happening and for him to let go. And I think people take a long time to die because they need that, a sort of a much more careful, loving, tender way of letting go, rather than the rip apart that happens with sudden death. And I think a lot of people are very in the spirit world, if there is a spirit world, but I think there probably is, they're very distressed by what happens to them, very traumatized. But I think the dying process it's another learning process. And this is what I call, it's like, the baby quickens towards birth. And I think, I'm talking, I'm not talking from any research here or academic study. I just feel that we quicken ourselves as we prepare for our death, which is our birth into consciousness, or whatever it is. That's what I mean by it.
Thank you for explaining that and sharing the experience with your father as well. Touching. We're going to have to wrap it up here, but I want to give you an opportunity to tell the listeners where they can find you, if you're doing any programs, events, certainly some information about your podcast as well.
Yes. So I have a book. Can I do this?
Please do.
Called Living Fully, Dying Consciously, and it contains a lot of information that we're talking about today. And my website is SueBrayne, BRAYNE, at .co.uk. And if you want to get in touch with me, please just get in touch with me via the website. You're most welcome. And I set up the podcast because I wanted to interview people about what it meant to them to embrace their mortality. And some of the people I've interviewed, well, all of them, are so inspiring because they're just grabbing life with two hands and living their mortality. And so I think you'll find well, I hope people find that these interviews really interesting. So I am planning a 4th series. It'll be in the new year now. So yes, just embracing your mortality. It's on Spotify and wherever, Buzzsprout, and you can get it anywhere really. Just pop in Embracing Your Mortality podcast.
Thank you, Sue. I mean, sounds like actually quite an avant-garde podcast to be taking this on so directly. Yeah. So final words or thoughts to leave our audience with?
Yes. Embrace your mortality with pride. I'm doing a TEDx talk on this, which should be going live sometime at the end of October. I'm not sure when. We're recording it on the 9th of October. And spread the word. Just enter your mortality with grace and fun and joy. And, you get one shot at this. So let's just make the best of the time that's given to us.
Well, thank you. What a enlivening discussion, and you're sharing all your experiences and thoughts. Thank you, Sue, for being here and sharing your wisdom with us. Yeah. And thank you all for listening.